Hi, welcome along to episode 2. I'm Andy the Northern Diver. In this episode we're going to be talking to my scuba diving instructor and mentor and a very good friend of mine, Steve Kirkman, about technical and cave diving, the highs and the lows, the risks versus rewards, and the good, the bad and the indifferent. Do you fancy a brew? Steve learned to dive over 20 years ago through the military and has progressed through the BSAC training syllabus, not only to an advanced diver level, but an open water instructor and through the military a sub-aqua diving supervisor. He now lives out in Fuerteventura, and amongst his day-to-day job in the oil and gas industry, he works as a technical instructor for TDI, teaching side mountain technical diving, as well as following his own path on his brand new SF2 Closed Circuit Rebreather. So grab yourself a brew, sit back and enjoy. So what kind of inspired you to the more technical route?
I think it's like every other form of activity you do. For me, after I'd gained my BSAC Advanced Diver qualification, I'd got my instructors, I'd done the things like the advanced Nitrox, and then I started diving on a twin set. And probably like most people, I hadn't done any formal training on the twin set at that particular point, but I just suddenly had this want and this desire to want to dive, and it wasn't necessarily about the deeper depths. It's because the things that I wanted to dive were at deeper depths. I have a fascination for wreck diving, because to me they're like an underwater playground. You know what I mean? It sounds really childish, you know what I mean? But it's where I am allowed to go and play without my wife telling me to grow.
I often use the analogy of when we were kids on a Sunday afternoon, but we'd go, for Sunday dinner, like a carvery somewhere with your grandparents and all your aunties and uncles. And if we went to there was a certain place down the road called the Bowling Green. And in the back of there, they had this massive adventure playground. And that is what a wreck is to me. But I know exactly what you mean with that. It's not. It's getting back to being a child and being excited about learning about what that wreck is.
But I think and that's what it is to me, precisely that, and it always has been. And of course, the better wrecks are at deeper depths.
Yeah.
And for those people that are listening and don't realise why, well, because the shallower the wreck is, the more it's affected by tidal range and just like in the weather conditions and being smashed against rocks and so on. So the deeper they tend to be, less damage because through currents and so on and so on.
Less people die. Less people die.
Yeah, there's less people on them. There's less people robbing stuff off them and so on and so on. And therefore, there is just a huge wealth of history, especially around the UK, a huge wealth of history, in our shipwrecks and what have you, all around United Kingdom. And I used to go out on the northeast coast quite a lot, going out of Eyemouth with a company called Marine Quest, run by a father and son business, and they're still running, absolutely fantastic. The pair of them. But I used to always go out on the technical boat, and we'd go out and we'd dive virgin wrecks and so on and so on. But anyways, that was the thing that started me off. It was that desire to want to dive better wrecks at deeper depths and so on and so on. So I'd already gone onto twin set diving. I'd watched quite a lot of stuff and listened to a lot of briefings from people like Brian Ingle, who was a BSAC technical diving instructor, to try and look at my configuration and that type of stuff. And then I went and decided, one time when I was home on leave, I decided now was the time to go and do my normoxic Trimix course. And that was my first step then really into, I would class into the deeper technical diving, using the mixed gases and so on, rather than doing extended range diving on air and then using a higher percentage of nitrox mix to accelerate the decompression and what have you. And then, of course, then you move to go below that 65 meters, from 65 down to 100 meters, or with some agencies such as Andy, where it's unlimited, you're then moving into hypoxic mixes. You're into quite serious diving now at this particular stage. You know what I mean? Dare I say it before anybody jumps on me? All diving serious. It doesn't matter what level you're diving at. You have to do the planning properly. But we class technical diving, in a lot of speak, to be diving that is slightly more complicated than that that we all know as being recreational diving. From the point of extended range diving downwards, I would very much say you're into technical diving in the open water side. So once I'd done the normoxic Trimix, the next thing was, well, what's down at 80 meters? You know what I mean? Right, I need to go there now. And it was just that desire to want to do more, that desire to want to do better, that desire to want to have a greater understanding of what it was I was doing and how that affects my body, you know what I mean? And the skills and the drills that you need to learn, all right, and that are encompassed within that particular type of diving. You know, the dive discipline, dare I say it, I love the dive planning, you know what I mean? If there's anything I'm sort of OCD on, it is, I love dive planning. You know, I can spend a week just going through the potential gas mixes in order to, to do the dive, you know what I mean? And how I could best do it, how I can accelerate decompression, you know what I mean? How's that going to work with my dive partner that I'm going in? You know what I mean? Because generally on the technical diving, we go with a dive partner rather than a dive buddy. But and that could be because we're on different mixes and so on and so on. You know, and I quite often, Martin Redfern, as you know, as Red, very much became my dive partner. We were diving regularly, doing technical diving, and we would be on the phone, and what have you, doing all their plans and so on and so on. And it was just constantly that desire to want to see what was down at the next depth, see how long I could stay, you know what I mean, and what the mechanics of doing that were, what the logistics were of doing all that, and so on and so on. And then, dare I say, not long after you've done a bit of hypoxic Trimix diving on open circuit, your bank balance kind of takes a plummet in a downward spiral, which of course you keep all secret because of course you can't allow your wife to realise that you're breaking the bank.
Not when she finds out about that torch. How much
yeah. Hey?
Remember how much you told her it was, that torch, compared to how much it actually was?
Well, I told her it was about like £100 or something like that. You know what I mean? Of course, the torch cost me 1,000 and odd quid. And yeah. So when she found that, but I mean, you already know my wife, Andy. She's incredibly tolerant, and she just laughs, and she just says, "I don't know why you just don't tell me." And I was like, "Well, it's like the one-upmanship game, isn't it? It's like it makes you feel better that you kept it secret, type thing."
So your bank balance on the rapid descent,
yeah,
then went out and bought a rebreather.
Well, I surprisingly enough, my wife was with me actually when I was at one of the dive shows. I got talking again to another incredibly well-known diver and one of the early pioneers, of technical diving within the United Kingdom, Kevin Gurr. And I was having a really good conversation with Kevin at one of the dive shows. They just designed, the Sentinel rebreather. And, despite in its early days, the problems that it had and, technicalities and so on and so on, I think a lot of that was also down to the fact that that particular time, VR technology was struggling, as a company to keep its head above water. And the Sentinel effectively was hopefully going to be the thing that would recover it and so on. And it didn't quite work out that way. But anyways, the Sentinel rebreather, as it was, in my opinion, was a fantastic unit. The technology behind it and everything else that has been used now and being developed onto other rebreathers. It was the first ever rebreather to have a gaseous CO2 sensor. It also had, Bluetooth electronics. And of course, yes, there was issues with that in the early days. But I think now that rebreather's passed across to Vobster Marine Services and now is known as the Red Bear, I think that has disappeared. But the fundamental thing about the rebreather, to me, was the work of breathing on that unit was fantastic, and it was quite simple to use. So that was my first closed circuit rebreather. I'd previously learned to dive on the Draeger Dolphin semi-closed rebreather out in Australia with my brother. He had those available at his dive centre, so that's the first one. And that's really what took me. I thought these rebreathers are just, they're the way forward. And of course, if you're then venturing into technical diving, certainly hypoxic Trimix, you soon realise that if you want to spend longer time at deeper depths and with accelerated decompression, the rebreather is definitely the way forward, because it allows you to breathe the optimum mixture of gas at every single second of the dive, because you're effectively going underwater with a gas mixing machine, and it's constantly mixing the gas, in accordance with this, the set parameters that you put into the computer, without complicating the conversation now. But that's what you're going underwater with, a life support machine, all right, that mixes gas underwater as you go, and they're absolutely fantastic.
I'd love one because of the learning. At the minute, I'm learning underwater photography, and as far as me diving training kind of stopped, but I'm getting better and better at things like my buoyancy control, finning technique, whilst trying to hold that camera and manage what I'm doing with that. So if I was going to go off on the next step, it would potentially be a rebreather. But then what's the point, I would ask, if my buddy doesn't have one, or I don't have someone to dive on with, because then we can't dive together. So for instance, if my wife stays on twin set, I can't stay any longer than her. For me, that's going to be my stopgap, is I've got to buy 2 rebreathers. One for me, one for her.
Well, I think a couple of things that you've just said there, for example, is again, you have to have a look at the diving that you're doing.
The other thing as well.
Rebreathers in photography underwater. I think anybody who's listening to this, who is an underwater photographer or rebreather, will turn around and would agree that underwater photography and rebreathers go together hand in hand. I mean, as far as the relationship goes, they're made for each other, because it just allows you to get closer to, the marine life that you want to photograph without it disappearing. And quite often marine life will come in because it's inquisitive, because you're not blowing bubbles and so on and so on. So it'll come in closer of its own accord. But it also, again, allows you to, I think it gives you a steadier platform, underwater, because once you've got the buoyancy correct, because everything's within the gas loop, you're not moving up and down the fluctuations slightly that you have, with open circuit breathing. Now, of course, if you've mastered the buoyancy as you should do, and you're in that Zen position, then your fluctuation should be centimeters. Not half a meter in, as your breath's going. So I'm not turning around and saying that people who do open circuit shouldn't bother doing photography. What I'm saying is that I think most professional photographers out there doing underwater photography would say that a rebreather and underwater photography kind of go together as a relationship. Is
the gas warm as well in a rebreather?
Yes, it is.
I find, because I'm so still for so long, I'm so much colder.
Yeah.
So if that is one extra benefit, that'd be you kind of sold it now.
Yeah, well, the thing is, again, it's like one of those things, when you first start diving rebreathers, and people say, what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks, Well, if you look at the benefits, firstly, everybody understands in diving that if you're breathing a Nitrox mix, as in a higher percentage partial pressure of oxygen on your dive, within the limits of the gas, then it's better for you, because you've got an increased oxygen thing. So therefore, the amount of nitrogen you're taking in, all right, is less. Therefore, the decompression penalty is less for the longer duration that you're breathing the gas at the depth you're breathing it at. Yeah. Because you've been breathing a higher percentage, there's less fatigue. If you're slightly older, it's better. If you're a dirty smoker, all right, it's better for you, because
you're down now.
As everybody knows, you're a carbon loader. You're maintaining carbon dioxide longer than what you would do if you weren't a smoker. So again, the oxygen the high percentage of partial pressure of oxygen helps to flush that out. So if you imagine you've got this machine on your back that's providing you with the absolute optimum mix of gas, oxygen percentage, throughout every single second of your dive. So as you're going down, because the partial pressure of oxygen increases, it reduces the amount of oxygen that it's injecting into the system. You know what I mean? Okay, to enable it to maintain the partial pressure that you want. And then on the way up, because the partial pressure is decreasing, it will start to inject oxygen, all right, to maintain the partial pressure. And what that means, of course, is that you can dive to, when I use the term, to deeper depths, all right. Now, of course, you know, if you're on Dillion, then there's 40 meters. What I mean is, but I would be able to stay at 40 meters on a rebreather for considerably longer than I would do on open circuit. The logistics involved of staying at 40 meters in line with me on a rebreather would be significant. And the great thing about it being the fact that it's within a closed loop means that the condensation, and moisture from your breath, all right, goes in, so it's nice and moist and it's wet. And as it goes through the scrubber, effectively the composite material that's in there causes a chemical reaction. That chemical reaction creates heat. So therefore, not only is your gas, all right, that is coming out of the cylinders being injected into the system at high pressure, therefore cold, is suddenly warmed up now. So you're now breathing gas that's nice and warm, it's moist, so you're not feeling dehydrated as much. So when we're looking at the benefits here, have I said any negatives at all yet? Do I think the rebreather takes more maintenance than open circuit? Yes, it does. Do I notice it? Is it significant? Does it hinder me? Does it, impede me? No, not at all. Not at all. Is it such that I have to turn up at a dive site 3 hours before? No, I don't. Do I have to prep it the night before? Yes, I do. Do I have to prep my open circuit dive kit the night before? Depends on what diving I'm doing, and so on and so on. But again, going back to your point about if it's you and Alex that are diving, if you can only stay down for as long as Alex is there, and that's true. But what happens when Alex is not diving? What happens if you came diving with me? But is there anything wrong at all with going diving with Alex? Alex is on a twin set because that's what she feels comfortable being at this moment in time. You will still get a fairly extensive, bottom time with her on a twin set, breathing Nitrox, say 27, to a dive of 40 meters without incurring too much decompression. I think the technology of today, the engineering, the guys, and the women that are involved in like the science behind rebreathers has come on so much from the days when, there's a lot of deaths in this year. And a lot of those deaths in this were for a multitude of reasons, many of them being diver error and misunderstanding, of the limitations and so on, rather than the units themselves. You hear all the time, of the various deaths throughout the year, whether it be on open circuit or whether it be closed circuit, whatever it may be. But I think quite a lot of the time, when the investigation the inquiry takes place, a lot of the time the error has come, through diver error rather than machine error, or equipment error. I think the engineering behind regulators, these days, is impeccable. The equipment that we have nowadays, on the open market, is fantastic. And very, very rarely breaks. But unfortunately, the human being is the human being. You know what I mean? And as I always say, Andy, you cannot predict the unpredictability of stupidity. And sometimes people in the should I use the word, in the drive for adventure, or the case may be, make silly mistakes. They do poor planning. They don't necessarily assess the risks as they should do. They cut corners. And and in the early days of rebreather diving, even up until when I started, people were making errors. When it came down to how long can they use that scrubber for, people would try and extend the life of the scrubber because they're not necessarily feeling anything from it at this moment in time. But because there was no carbon dioxide gaseous sensors in the early days, you won't necessarily know anything until it's too late. And people were doing all sorts of things, to try and extend the life of the scrubber rather than just throw the scrubber in the bin. It costs you £6.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Probably slightly more now. What is the cost? £6 versus your life trying to just extend it for an extra hour. Why would you do that?
It's human nature, isn't it, to try and push that envelope just that little bit and just see, and then you become complacent and maybe naive with that and get away.
Yeah, I think if you're, I think we if we're all being absolutely honest, let's have a look at it. If you're doing your recreational diving aspects, you know what I mean, where you're on holiday, you're wherever it is, you go in, it's like with the group, being led by the dive master, the dive instructor, he tells you that he wants you to know when you get down to your 100 bar. So you all turn round, don't you, when you get to 100 bar, all right, as per whoever's got there first. All right, you've all got to be out of the water or an ascending surface at 50 bar. But of course, what people fail to realise is that when the guy that you're with, all right, already has a high breathing rate, you know what I mean, of 25 litres, per minute on the surface, and now because you haven't bothered to do your rule of thirds, right, you're still down at 15, 20 metres, and he comes across right out of gas, and he's breathing like a freight train. In that panic and the time it takes you to get that individual sorted out before you can safely make the ascent to the surface, you know what I mean, in order to not just save them but also prevent yourself from being injured, there's a good possibility you're going to end up being out of the gas before you do. So understanding that rule of thirds and sticking to the rule of thirds, especially when you start doing square profile diving, you know what I mean, where you're pretty much at the depth that you need to be at, and wreck dives are a classic example, where you're at the maximum depth for virtually the whole duration of the dive. You're not doing the multi-level ascent back to the surface where you can then constantly do that risk analysis and readjust your rule of thirds to suit, you know what I mean, so that when you arrive at 6 meters, right, in the final piece of your safety stop or your decompression stop, wherever it might be, you've still got enough gas in your cylinder. But if you're doing square profile diving and technical diving, the rule of thirds are an absolute must. All right, and it must be one of the disciplines that you have to get into. You need to stick to it 100% rather than flouting it, because the question I would pose to anyone: nobody has ever died in diving by having too much gas. You know what I mean? So plan, add the percentage, P for plenty, all right, without it making logistically impossible to do the dive. Consider that having too much gas, going in with 15 litre cylinder, all right, whilst everybody else has got the 10 litre cylinders on the back, does not mean that you're a crap diver. What it means is that you're going in with a volume of gas on your back that you feel comfortable with, and effectively would be a better solution, all right, in order to effect a rescue, all right, underwater, if somebody was in a panic, than the rest of the guys that are all on the 10 litre cylinders diving to, the 25, 30 metre depths, or the case may be. People's configuration and how they want to configure their diving and how they want to do their diving is generally their business. If an individual is coming with me diving, then it becomes my business.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Because the diving with me, and it becomes my business because I need to think of my own safety as well as their safety. So if somebody came to me, right, and had 2-3 litre cylinders charged to 300 bar, and said, "Yeah, I want to go on this dive to 25 meters," I'd go, "Sorry, not with me, mate. That's just not going to happen, I'm afraid." Camera to see it was like a wah. Notwithstanding, of course, my personal opinion on high pressure cylinders versus low pressure cylinders. Myself personally, I would try and persuade an individual to go for a a higher volume, low pressure cylinder than go for a lower volume, high pressure cylinder. One, because not a lot of places are able to fill your cylinders to the maximum capacity of 300 bar. When you then say, for example, move into mixed gas diving, getting the blends correct at the same time as trying to pump them up to 300 bar, like, becomes quite difficult for even the very best of gas blenders. So having a higher volume cylinder but lower pressure, to me, is better. And plus it puts less wear and tear as well on your diving equipment than having higher pressure cylinders. But again, it all goes back, Andy, to personal preference, personal decision as to what you go with, and a lot of that as well comes down to how you're advised, who's advising you, who's chatting to you, and I don't necessarily always think either that the best people to give you the advice are the shopkeepers, because they're running a business. I think sometimes, there's enough forums out there in the diving world, to give people good, sound advice on stuff.
Everybody has got their own opinion. So who I'm influenced off rather than what I influence other people is going to be totally different than the guy who lives next door. He might have never dived out of his own comfort zone or without anybody different. So his take on the same subject might be totally different, might be a completely different variety. So I think it's so hard for newer divers. Certainly, like I said before, when I turned up in Fuerteventura with that BCD on, I had my pony clamp for something. I thought that was going to impress you. I didn't even have a pony with me. And I had this beacon on my shoulder, and I had this reel that was like that big, and I didn't know any better. Every bit of kit that's out there has its right and proper place. It's just you justifying either taking it on that dive, owning it in the first place. But there's no point in me having a cave reel. So cave diving, isn't there?
I'd never even dreamt at all about cave diving. It was something that I thought, I'd never like it. It was, couldn't understand why people would ever think of even doing it. And then, talking about people who have been inspirational, in who I am now as a diver, effectively. Well, one of the fellas that I met years ago, simply because he himself was organising the first ever joint services caving diving expedition to the Lot region in France. At the time, I was out in Iraq. The advertisement came across because it came across on the Joint Services SADS site. That places were available, and in order to get a space on it, you had to do bish, bash, and bosh. And I went, got to be on it. How the dates don't match. All this, I'm never going to get there. And then all of a sudden, all right, the commanding officer comes in and he says, "Our assembly goes, we're going back early." He said, "We're going to go back, 3 months early from the operational tour because of the slight drawdown and what have you around Basra as it was at the time." And then he says, "So when we go back, I want people to be able to maximise the amount of time they've got. I want guys to go off adventure training. I want them to do this." And I'm like, "Oh, that's it." And I was immediately on the email, all right, to this fella called Guy Wallace, all right, who became a massive inspiration to me, in diving. Got onto Guy, who I'd met several times before, but I didn't know him as an individual. I knew who he was. I'd met him before. I'd listened to him talk, and so on. And he was running the Exped. He was a cave diving instructor with Technical Diving International. And and I got a place on the course, which then meant I had to go through the necessary stages, going through cabin diver course, intro to cave diver, and then onto the full cave diver course. And then eventually I did, stage cage diver, rebreather cave diver, DPV cave, and so on. So again, that expedition to France was, I would say, was the turning point in my diving, as far as looking at myself as an individual, my ability, my skills, and how I wanted to perfect them. And I had, previous to that, always advertised, whether I was diving with my son, who hated me for it, But every time you go diving, to me, you should practice a minimum of 3 skills in the water every time you go diving. And those skills could be a DV recovery. It could be a delayed SMB deployment. It could be line laying skills. You know what I mean? Whatever it is, think of something that you're going to practice, as a skill whilst you're in the water. And it could be affecting, the buoyancy control. It could be reverse fin kicking, whatever it is. But then anyways, I went off and did my first course, cabin diver course, and Guy Wallace, typical forces guy, no nonsense. And you come out on your brief and he'll, you kind of get the, right, so how do you think that went, Steve? And you go, well, I really enjoyed the dive and I thought it was great and this and the other. And then he comes out, listen, you can enjoy the dive when you're looking good. And at this moment, these are the things that are looking shit. In this list and endless, you go, I thought I was not a bad diver. In actual fact, I'm really shit. You know what I mean? And then you're just getting smashed, and you're getting smashed, not in a non-constructive way, but in a disciplined way that I personally thought, oh, this is fantastic. This is exactly what I needed. You know what I mean? And so on and so on. And then progressing onto that, and again, all of the skills that come with that, the line laying, the hovering, that really flat position in the water, the frog fin kick, the modified frog fin kick, helicopter turns, which many other training agencies in that are doing now in open water diving. But when I started cave diving, all those skills were very much cave diving oriented. You know what I mean? And only mastered, by those that were doing cave diving. And then the next time, I did the second cave diving exped. We went to Florida, and again on that one, I had a fantastic time. And when we're thinking about monumental dives that I remember, one of the things, as at that time out in Florida for the first time, and having read the books on Sheikh Exley, who was again one of the pioneers in Floridian cave diving, and known by millions as such. He had been doing some exploration in what is a place known as Peacock Springs, and trying to put together a passageway that started at a sinkhole called Orange Grove, all right, to the sinkhole effectively that started at Peacock Springs and joined them together. And it was 14,000 feet or something like that of cave dives, of tunnels at various depths, ranging down to, I think, maximum about 32 meters or thereabouts, going through various places. And eventually when Sheikh Exley did that, of course, that was the world record, longest ever cave dive at that particular point. And I can imagine the planning that went into that years ago when cave diving was in its infancy. Stuff for cave diving was in its infancy, and a lot of the kit in this area was made by the guys in their sheds.
But they wouldn't have just done that in one dive, would they? As in, they'd have done multiple dives, dropping kit off along the way, that kind of stuff.
Probably in those days, most definitely, and it would have taken, and they'd have gone in at different sinkholes, so they'd have started off at Orange Grove, and then they'd gone from Orange Grove, and then they got to the next sinkhole, which I think is called Challenge Sink, I think it's called. And then they come out there and they go, oh, that's fantastic, we know that. So what we'll do now is next time we do, we'll miss out that distance, and we'll go in at Challenge Sink, and we'll go on to the next piece and do it that way. And then eventually, they joined the tunnels. I think it was the Peanut Restriction, I think, where the two kind of tunnels joined. And then they would have eventually come out the other side, and so on and so on. So how Sheikh Exley actually did it, what I mean? But the amount of dives reading his book, and anybody at all, I would, recommend reading his book and this and that. But it's a fascinating book. And so I was out in Florida with two very good friends, Dave Taylor, who I learned to cave dive with, and Guy Wallace, who taught me to cave dive. and this was part of a military diving expedition. And at the time, on that exped, we were the only 3 that were full qualified staged cave divers. And Guy Wallace had been teaching out in Florida, for a number of years previous to that, when he was posted as an officer at Tampa.
Mm.
And so he'd been diving these, caves for a number of years, and he'd always fancied doing what was now called the Grand Traverse as a dive. And if you do the planning right, you can do it as a single dive. Many people do it nowadays. So it's, so now, the avid cave diver out there would think, well, I'd do that every Saturday, you know what I mean? But, in the days when it was done by Sheikh Exley, it wouldn't have been an easy thing. And for somebody doing it for the very first time, having read the book and seen people like Sheikh Exley as an inspiration, for cave diving and so on, in the same way as Martin Farr is, and in the United Kingdom, as well as many others. But for me, it was fundamental, and not just that, because Guy Wallace, my very good friend and mentor in cave diving, had wanted to do that dive for so long. So when we did it, right, the way we kind of progressed through the tunnels, the end stage, I was supposed to be leading out at the end. So we got to, I think it's called Pothole, I think it is, where you do your final recalculation of. Now at that particular recalculating point, I was supposed to take over the leading of the dive, and Guy was number 3. But I paused and I, gave the signal to switch. And it's like one of those moments where you can see that the person understands the reason why you've done it. And I just kind of thought to myself, this bloke here has waited 10 years to do this dive. You know what I mean? And here I am, first time in Florida, I'm getting to do it. You know what I mean? He should be the person leading it out. You know what I mean? And I came out, and to me, when I think back of doing that dive, as a relatively new person to cave diving and this, that, and the other, it was fundamental. And, and again, the discipline and everything that's involved within cave diving inspires me all the time. I love it. I love the discipline behind it, the skills, the drills, and the great thing, there's a certain thing amongst cave divers, a certain amount of kind of honesty within your bond between your fellow colleagues within the team. Now, I think you'll probably agree. Generally, in the open water, when we see our buddies doing things wrong, quite often people a little bit they lack in the moral courage to tell their mate that they were crap in the water. You know what I mean? That whilst they were finning, did they not see the crap that they were spewing up because the finning technique was appalling, all right, or that we were too close to the bottom, that they lack the moral courage to turn around and say, listen, you were dog shit today, you know what I mean, you need to sort that out, you know what I mean, blah, blah, blah. In the cave diving fraternity, that happens all the time. And it's not done nastily, it's done frankly, because you can't afford, right, to be making errors where your buoyancy, all right, isn't right, where your fin kicking, all right, is suspect, you know what I mean, and so on and so on. Your inability to read forward, right, in order to anticipate when the next reel needs to be placed, or when the peg needs to be put in, or the arrow needs to be put in, and so on and so on. And of course, in the cave diving piece, from start to finish, it's a mission. How far can I get inside this cave, all right, in my rule of thirds, before I either have to come back, all right, or I have to mark it and come back and go in through the other piece if I want to create the traverse or whatever it might be. And the whole thing, I just absolutely love everything about it, you know. So so again, Guy Wallace was my inspiration, right? You know, and led me into the cave diving world, you know. Which and I could recommend it to anybody. If you really want to learn about how good you are as a diver, you really want, all right, somebody to tell you and put you right, all right, where you're in the errors that you have, then cave diving is the place where people will perfect your diving ability, in my opinion.
Right, mate. So I think we've covered pretty much everything. Anything else you can think of?
Because I'm out at work, and like there's another pump, like out at work in Mozambique, you know, I don't get to talk to too many people. So it's all, and I can't go diving, so I've got to get it off my chest.
And it's now 20 to 12 where you are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and a nice early start again in the morning.
Right, so yeah, thanks for your time, buddy.
Yeah, no problem. Nice talking.
And terrible.
Because I'm not tired now, so I'll need to unwind. Because you just put me through the mill. I'm all fucking hyped up now.
Don't pretend you don't love this. You love it. Absolutely thrive on it. Look at the little smile on your face. Right, take it.
It's diving, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's diving.
Doving. Right, adios, mate. I'll see you later.
All
Thanks
right.
very much.
Yeah,
Cheers.
no dramas, mate.
Take it easy.
Catch you later, bud.
See you on Insta.